Alrighty, it is time for Mountain Thane. This has been requested, and it's something I should have done a while ago. However, the best time to do something that you should have done before is to do it now. So, let's do it. There is something that is interesting that was found out very recently for Thane that you should be careful of. In the Sims, right now, Mountain Thane's actually using the wrong spell data for Thunderblast, the primary mechanic for the class. So the spell data that it's using is for Protection Warrior instead of Fury Warrior, and it's actually currently simming 40% higher than it's supposed to. So if you're looking at Sims, if you're wondering why the highest AoE simming Mountain Thane Fury Warrior spec is using shit like Spear, like the Champion Spear, and it's doing your top damage in like a Dungeon Slice sim, it is simply because it is doing way more damage than it's supposed to in Sims. I do not know when that is being fixed. It could be fixed right now. It could be. But it was Silmarian that brought it to my attention, and a lot of us noticed it, and probably should have said something, but we kind of just, like, glazed over it for some reason. It's a very obvious thing, but I don't know why we just didn't be like, hey, why is it doing this? But, whatever. But that is kind of besides the point, but I just wanted to let you know ahead of time in case you're simming your character and going, oh, why am I not doing as much as my sim says? I'm not even close, because it's just wrong. But going into the class, first thing I want to talk about is how the spec functions and how it works compared to something like Slayer or traditional Fury Warrior, because it is a bit different. Some people enjoyed that I explained why things worked the way they worked. And what was worth looking at and what wasn't worth looking at, mainly because it helped them kind of get a better grasp on the... I just hit my mic, sorry. It helped them get a better grasp on the spec and class as a whole. So let's do that here. How does this thing work? First of all you have to do, really, for this thing to function, is you take Whirlwind off your bars and you replace it with Tclap. Because of this talent here. This talent makes basically everything that affects Whirlwind, being a Seismic or Barbaric Training, Seismic Reverberation, Whirlwind, and Improve Whirlwind, and Meat Cleaver are all affected by and now augment your Tclap. One of the reasons why this is great is because if you look at the data, even with all these buffs to Whirlwind, Tclap does 206,000 damage, and Whirlwind does 79,000 damage, right? And we are also generating additional rage based on Improved Whirlwind. It doesn't show it in the tooltip there, but you do generate additional rage based on target's hit. But basically, you're replacing your Whirlwind with Tclap, and it is just a far superior button to it in every single way. And because you're doing that, you have this talent. The same talent also makes your stuff do Storm Strike damage. Your Thunderclap and your Thunderblast do Storm Strike damage, and it completely ignores armor, which is great. It means our damage is pretty static, pretty consistent against all armored mob types, and that's good. Ignoring armor is good for us. Now, the big difference here and why you're seeing a lot of people run Mountain Thane is these talents on the side. Slayer actually has no defensive value in it. Slayer has, when you use a Sudden Doom proc or a Sudden Death proc, it heals you for 50% of the damage, but healing damage is not nearly as good as mitigating the damage or having more health. And this talent just gives you flat more health. 5% stamina, and when you use it, it actually gives you 10% max health, which is really, really good. So you see my health goes from 8 million to 8.8 million. That talent works alongside this one to give me almost as much health as a tank. And that will help you survive countless big damage instances. So it is very, very good. Highly recommended. The reason why we don't really run Keep Your Feet on the Ground, it's primarily for... This one's primarily for tanks. But the uptime of the Thunderblast damage reduction is actually pretty good. It's roughly like 48 to 50% from when I was using it before. But the problem is you're never really going to have that DR exactly when you want it, so you'd rather have 5% health at all times plus a 10% max health whenever you want it, versus 8% DR every now and then. But how the spec works is Raging Blows, Executes, and Thunderclaps all have a chance to generate a Lightning Strike. A Lightning Strike does a decent amount of damage, generates Rage, and when you're an Avatar, more Lightning Strikes proc. The next thing that lightning strikes do is when they crash down and hit your target, they kind of sparkle out a little bit, so they just do AoE damage around your target too. Passive cleave is always good. These talents just augment, like Raging Blow, execute damage, Thunderblast calls down a lightning strike on it. So this is just more lightning strikes, essentially, which is really good. And then there's this talent. This talent is kind of interesting, but this is something I do not track. I do not pay attention to it at all. It just kind of happens in my rotation. And that's for one of the reasons why is because we'll just read it. Lightning strikes have a 50% chance to make your next 2 Bloodthirst have no cooldown, deal 35% increased damage, and generate 2 additional rage. And this is one of the things that makes this spec do a ton of execute damage, because this Bloodthirst additional damage is stacked on top of Vicious Contempt, on top of the additional crit chance from Blood Craze, and all of that funnels into the additional damage that Bloodbath does. So even if you're not casting a Bloodthirst, the Bloodbath damage that you're doing is actually getting augmented damage from this burst of power proc. I do not track it at all. I don't pay attention to it at all. It just kind of happens in my rotation. If I run out of things to press and I have an extra Bloodthirst to press because it's active, yeah, I'll throw one in. But realistically, this is not something you have to press or pay attention to. And then finally, while Avatar is not active, Lightning Strike has a 10% chance to grant you Avatar for 4 seconds. You also notice that casting Avatar grants you 2 charges of Thunderblast. 2 charges is the max amount of charges that this spec can have. So it gives you the max amount of Thunderblast charges when you activate Avatar, when you press the button. But getting an Avatar proc from the Lightning Strike does not give you 2 charges of Thunderblast. It's kind of worded really weird, but only when manually pressing Avatar do you get these 2 Thunderblast charges, so you don't get as many Thunderblasts as you think you're going to get. And the other thing that's important to note is going into our opener and our opening rotation is we have to consider Unhinged and Ravager. The other spec we play has Bladestorm in it, so we don't really think about Unhinged, it just kind of works. But how Ravager works, because it's casting a Bloodthirst for you, in your burst window, you do not cast Bloodbath at all. In your burst window, you just leave it alone, you don't pay attention to it. Because Ravager is going to be automatically casting Bloodbaths for you while it's active. So that leads us into our opener. People also liked the note that I did, so I'll have this note here. I'll once again put it in the description. But here's our opener. We go into combat, Recklessness, Charge, Rampage, Ravager. We Ravager before, so we enrage ourselves because it's the most important thing. Then we Ravager. Then we cast our Avatar Roar, Crushing Blow, Thunderblast, Rampage. When you're doing this, one thing you'll notice is that it looks like you will not have enough time to Crushing Blow and Thunderblast before Rampaging again without losing your Enrage uptime, which is the most important thing, like all Fury stuff. But because your Unhinged is automatically casting Bloodthirst for you while you're doing this, you actually do get that additional, what is it, like a half second? No. You get the additional second of Enrage extending while the Ravager is running and casting Bloodthirst for you, so you will have time to do it. It just looks kind of weird. Well, let me show you how the opener looks here, where we start with you want a manual keybind for Recklessness for this spec, because just like the single target for Fury, or for Slayer, sorry, we do not have the ability to automatically enrage ourselves through Titanic Rage or anything like that. We're a bit talent point starved, so we just play it normally. We just play it like we would our single target build, where we have to manually get ourselves enraged first. Then we Ravager first, then we Cooldowns, Crushing Blow, Thunderblast, and then you see I am not personally pressing it, but my Bloodbath is being automatically consumed. Now that my Ravager is gone, then I will be sending procs. But just like you played AoE for Slayer, essentially Thunderblast and Thunderclap is just going to be your Whirlwind, right? So kind of same rules essentially apply, where it's like, hey, keep Whirlwind stacks up. You see this Thunderblast proc? The next time I cast my Bloodbath, it's going to consume that Thunderblast proc, giving Bloodbath bonus damage. It's just it's really, really good. So that bonus damage is, once again, like I said, is fed into the Bloodbath. It's fed into Vicious Contempt when targets gets low. You're going to be hitting like 3 to 4 million Bloodbath crits sometimes with this spec, and it feels very, very good. Now let's go over our priorities. Always keep Enraged. Number one thing for Fury, always has, always will be. Don't waste your cooldowns. If you are at the end of a pack or you can't keep full uptime or a big mechanic is coming up that might make you step off the boss, just hold off a bit, right? We want to make sure we get as much value as possible. Especially one thing to consider is because Unhinged is casting Bloodthirst for us, we have to be in range of the mob we are hitting for those Bloodthirst to be cast. So if we are standing away from the mob or we have to move away from a mechanic, as an example here, so we're having our Bloodthirst cast for us, right? It's going to cast for us. But if we're not close to the mob, Bloodthirst will not automatically be cast on the target, right? No, that's the previous one, sorry. So you'll notice that our Bloodthirst only hit once. It is supposed to hit 3 times. But because I was not in physical range of the mobs, the Bloodthirst does not actually cast. You have to be within physical proximity of something to hit for the Bloodthirst to actually go off. You can't just throw your Ravager and assume it's hitting your targets with Bloodbath while you're not even on it. And once again, like AoE, we keep our Whirlwind stacks up through Thunderclap. The reason why I'm not really making this around a single target rotation is essentially Thunderblast is such an important part of our priority that we don't really have a specific single target thing. Because we're running all of these talents to buff Thunderblast, we're just going to have the AoE talents. That's why I'm doing it as an AoE priority. And even then, Thunderblast does enough damage that that's simply what we're doing. So it is, our rotation is, if you have 2 stacks of Thunderblast, make sure you cast it before anything else so you can generate more stacks, because you can only go up to a max of 2. It is then Bloodbath, Crushing Blow. This is for AoE, by the way. Just Thunderblast. Rampage. Rampage, depending on what's going on in combat, remember our priority is to always be enraged. So Rampage doesn't always have to go after Thunderblast. Rampage is just down here as what button you would press within that priority. But if you are going to be unenraged for any reason, or you have to get off the mobs, staying enraged is the most important. So Rampage will be something that you will cast, guaranteed to make sure you stay enraged before any of your other abilities. But after that, it is just normal Thunderclap, because you can see here that Thunderclap does 206 physical damage and deals damage reduced beyond 5, and it does just about as much damage as our other 2 spells, and it is not technically AoE capped. It does reduce damage instead of stopping at 5, so Thunderclap becomes one of our best buttons for sure, even in normal AoE. So we're just going to be pressing this thing in our rotation normally, and as one of the buttons that we have, it will generate Thunder Lightning Strikes, which do more AoE, but realistically, you don't have to think about this too much, where Thunderclap is in this rotation. Because it's on a cooldown, you have 6 seconds, or about 5 seconds between, so you're going to be pressing everything else anyway. It's just kind of there in the priority, right? Like, you're going to be doing other stuff. By the time it comes back off cooldown, you're going to be pressing it anyway, so you don't really have to think about the priority too much. It's mainly that it's just there because it does a decent amount of damage, and it does that nature/storm strike damage. So it does bypass armor, whereas our other abilities do not bypass armor. It's good. It's a good button, man. It's a very good button. And then for single target, literally the only thing you change for single target is you'll cast Crushing Blow before Bloodbath. That's it. And realistically in AoE, I think Silmarian, again, was one of the guys that just kind of did the math behind it. It realistically does not matter if you're casting Crushing Blow or Bloodbath first. Basically, it doesn't matter. There is a bit of a difference where you kind of do want to cast your... you kind of do want to cast Crushing Blow before Bloodbath, mainly because you're getting that additional critical strike chance with Blood Craze. So... because in AoE, because of that, like I talked about in the beginning of the video, that 40% not variants, but Thunderblast is doing 40% more damage than what we're supposed to. Realistically, Bloodbath might not be our priority in AoE compared to Crushing Blow. So realistically, if you kind of want to, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Basically, it doesn't matter what you put here. It could be Crushing Blow, it could be Bloodthirst. Personally, because of my current like muscle memory, I'm generally casting Crushing Blow before Bloodthirst or Bloodbath anyway, just because I'm just used to it. But the truth be told, it just doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't matter. It is such a damage negligence that you don't really have to think about it much. But if you want to optimize a little bit, realistically, you can Crushing Blow first before Bloodbath, just because it gives it that additional crit chance, right? As well as that additional crit chance works in with Burst Power and Physical Contempt and all that good stuff. Because basically this spec is built around doing a ton of like flat AoE, and then it's doing a lot of execute damage is what the spec does. Now, as far as like things you can do to be advanced, I had a struggle to remember to put anything in here really. Basically, it's when you're in your burst window, remember that Unhinged is casting Bloodbath for you, so you don't have to actually press Bloodbath in your burst window, and that making sure you're spending Thunderblast charges before you pop Avatar, because if, let's say you're in a situation, right, where you're just doing your stuff. Come on, game, be nice to me. Give me a Thunderblast charge. The game is not being nice to me. Give me a Thunderblast charge. So if you're in this situation, right, where you have your cooldowns, but you have a charge of Thunderblast, if you activate your Avatar, you technically only get one charge of Thunderblast, because it sets your Thunderblast charges to maximum, which is 2. So instead of sending your cooldowns immediately, send your Thunderblast before casting your cooldowns, just because it does a lot of AoE damage, right? So make sure you send your Thunderblast charges before casting Avatar, so you get the max stacks of Thunderblast. And then during your burst window, remember that Ravager is casting Bloodbath for you, so you do not actually have to cast Bloodbath yourself. That is one thing that took me the longest to get used to, mainly because it feels really weird when you get into the rhythm of casting Crushing Blow, Bloodbath, and you're casting the other buttons right, Crushing Blow, Bloodbath. In your burst window, it feels weird to not actually hit the Bloodthirst, Bloodbath button. But after a while of playing it, it'll make sense, and it will feel better. It's just kind of awkward at first. But that's really it for Mountain Thane. You're essentially just playing Fury Warrior. You replace Whirlwind with Thunderclap, and then when the button lights up and you're enraged, you're hitting Thunderblast. That's kind of it. There's nothing really extra or special about it. It has a little bit more defensive value than Slayer. Its damage profile, this is actually something that is kind of interesting about it, that if you're just doing your weekly like 10 keys, or you're doing your lower keys, like you're doing your 8s and stuff, you'll actually probably see a worse performance playing Mountain Thane in those lower keys, because Mountain Thane's damage profile is far less bursty, and it's more like high sustained DPS, compared to Slayer, which is that big burst AoE. So in lower keys, that big burst AoE might actually provide you a better benefit from Slayer, just because you're actually able to get your damage out before the mobs die, especially if you're playing with things like Enhanced Shaman or Ret Paladin that just explode everything, that you'll actually be able to do damage before all of the smaller mobs die. So you might see a bit of bonus or overall damage playing Slayer instead of Thane. But Thane just has a lot of defensive value in higher keys. However, one thing that, like I said at the start of the video, which was the fact that it was simming, Thunderblast was simming 40% higher than it was supposed to. So I don't actually know if Thane does more damage than Slayer at this point. Generally, especially when you're fighting more sustained AoE packs, I think it does. Slayer does have a lot more RNG involved with Reap the Storm procs. Like if you're getting a lot of Reap procs, you're probably doing just as much or maybe more damage than Thane. especially since now we can sim with the correct information, with Thunderblast being the wrong spell data. But realistically, it's kind of a play what you want thing. Even getting into, like, the higher upper end keys, even Noxiv got into, like, what? Almost 3,500? Excuse me. Noxiv was, like, what? Like, 3,500 almost without playing Thane at all, because he just didn't like it. And now he's playing Thane, and he's a little over 3,500 now, like 3,540, something like that. I don't know if that's due to Thane. I don't know if that's due to just their whole group getting better. Couldn't tell you. But realistically, it's kind of preference. The main difference is in higher keys. Things hit harder, and having all this extra health is really, really nice. So that's all there really is to consider. If you do have questions about Thane, I'm better at, like, specifically answering things because I can't remember everything I want to talk about while I'm recording videos like this. I'll once again put this little thing in the description if people want it. And then I will also be putting this build that I've been using in the comments or down below as well. If you're not running high-end keys, feel free to just take points out of endurance training and put them over here in Wild Strikes. But I'm going to be putting the endurance training variant of it in the description just because that's what I run. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a good one. Bye-bye.